Hello, everyone. Dr. Ames here. This time I'm going to talk about Chapter 1 of our textbook and give an overview of the hotel industry. Here are our learning objectives for Chapter 1. We're really going to talk about the basic aspects of the tourism industry and define the various segments of it and so forth. We'll look at lodging industry in particular, the types of properties, guests, and the characteristics of each. We will talk about the various and sometimes complex ownerships of uh, different lodging properties and how they fall into various organizational theories. And then we'll talk slightly at the end about some industry challenges in the current times. And we'll also briefly end with career opportunities and so forth, and how you can plan for a career in the hotel industry. Well, the first thing to talk about really is that lodging is part of the tourism industry. And the tourism industry itself has many, many segments. But when we talk about lodging in particular, then we have owners. And owners come in various types. But in particular, in a general term we want to use is hoteliers. And those are the professionals who work in the hotel and lodging business and sometimes are the owners as well. Um, the way a general manager would manage a hotel uh, is pretty much the same, regardless of the size of the hotel or the various amenities of the operation. And this is what we talk about in basic fundamentals of management and other management courses in our department. The fact that once you learn how to be a professional manager, that it's all about adapting to the context, but the way you act as a professional manager is pretty much consistent across industries and sectors and so forth. And so it is in the hotel industry as well. You're going to do the same type of things that you do as a manager anywhere, but it's going to be very specific to the lodging industry itself. And so there will be familiar departments, which become the functional level departments that we talk about in management and so forth. And you'll have various names for the different levels of management that you will encounter. When we talk about tourism and so forth, that lodging is part of the industry, we talk about tourists. And we have an international agency that deals with and defines tourists, indeed, for all of us. So from the United Nations, we have the World Tourism Organization, and their definition of a tourist is anyone who is a visitor whose trip includes an overnight stay or is otherwise classified as a same day visitor, maybe as a visitor to some attraction, something like that. That would be the more or less formal and worldly, widely accepted definition of tourist. And then we have the tourist industry, which includes all the various segments and businesses that cater to the needs of those who are traveling. And certainly it is a huge number of people that are always going from one place to another. And anyone that does travel from one place to another is generally considered a tourist. Um, when we look at industries in general, it's in the top 10. In 49 of the 50 states, it certainly figures quite heavily in the economy of Missouri and so forth, drawing people to the state where they spend money not just on the tourist attractions themselves, but also money in the local economies and so forth. So the industry itself is all of those businesses that will be ready to cater to the needs of that particular segment of the traveling public. Um, but let's take this concept of the tourism industry a little bit deeper. Um, we could name a whole bunch of businesses that provide a product or a service specifically to tourists. Um, and what we would do in a case like that would be that we would look at a place like Lake of the Ozark, where certainly restaurants and souvenir shops and gift shops of all types, resorts, and then all the various rentals of property and equipment and the use of the lake and so forth. And so those are all products and services related to tourists, and they have a much wider impact than just down there at the lake. And the same is true of the various caves that are many locally owned by private individuals and so forth, many of them family owned. And those also draw people to the state, and over time they visit all these caves and so forth. Um, and so all those services that are provided there are considered services to tourists. Um, but it's a wider ripple when you really think about it. The tourism industry, encompassing all of it, does for the traveling public. Many people do drive in America, and so other businesses that benefit from tourism are convenience stores, C-stores that dot the roadways everywhere you go, providing gas. So we need those gas stations and associated C-stores, but also various souvenir shops, and then food establishments of all types. Some are fast food, some are diners, some are restaurants, some are chains and franchises. Uh, and then we have the opportunity as tourists to purchase niche products of all types. And we can participate in rental services of all types, like car rentals and bike rentals and boat rentals and motorcycle rentals and so forth. And we use financial services as well when we're traveling. We use ATM machines and so forth and so forth. So when you think about it, there's a reason that the tourist industry is generally in the top 10 everywhere you go in America. Here's our various segments when we look at where are things happening in the tourist industry. First of all, when it comes to hospitality, then we are talking about the lodging operations. Lodging is where people stay to spend the night somewhere when they're traveling. But those lodging operations over time have certainly grown to include much huge revenue producers like food and beverage operations as well. Um, and people travel for different reasons, of course. So people will obviously travel for business as well as for personal reasons, and they will need lodging and or food and beverage services when they get to where they're staying. They might also need other things like professional meetings and spaces to hold conventions and things like that. And some lodging operations will cater to these types of services and some won't. There are many different types of hospitality and lodging operations out there. And so it just depends on what is the mission of any of those given operations and what do they really consider themselves as being. So facilities can include a gym or a spa, but they could also include a convention center or some sort of private retreat, something like that. And then when we talk about the retail industry, we're really talking about all those shopping stores that are out there and available. Um, and those are some of the things that I identified earlier, like C-stores and souvenir shops and gas stations and all of those sorts of things. So, well, those are retail operations. Um, but in particular, those gift and souvenir shops. And then again, we have higher levels of these that sometimes are magnets for the traveling public, like large retail shopping malls. Certainly, a good example would be the mall down there in St. Louis, which whenever anybody internationally travels through the international airports down there, they almost certainly want to visit the St. Louis Mall that's down there. Um, and we have other things like specialized markets and any business really that is selling products or providing services to the public. And then we have the transportation services. Think of the huge amount of revenue that's generated by the various transportation services. This is also a big part of the tourism industry. So we have airplanes and all the associated costs with that, but we have rental cars and we have even trains, cruise ships, and so forth. And then when it comes to destination sites, well, these are places where the traveling public or tourists will go to do something. And so these could be cut across a wide range of activities like sporting, ethnic events, cultural events of all type, entertainment events of all type. Or they could just simply be interesting geographic locations that are historical or have some other significance for some reason to enough people to want to go there and visit. When we look at the various lodging properties that will cater to this traveling public again as part of the tourism industry, it's just a huge range of options that are out there for people. And as you see some of the different types right here, Um, these types of tourist alternatives are all very different. And so they include things like destination resorts, and you will find these in exotic locations with quite often, since they are fairly isolated sometimes, we will find lavish amenities and so forth. You go there because it is the place to go by reputation. And then we have the full service hotels. These operations offer a variety of different sleeping rooms, a variety of food and beverage options, such as buffets, or maybe having a coffee shop or dining room, or both, having lounges or room service, most likely, and even some banquet facilities because they are full service hotels. And you will generally find that these may be very large as well. Select service hotels, these cut it back one level in service, and the first thing to go is the food and beverage operation. So they provide a variety of sleeping rooms of different types, but no food and beverage. They might have a complimentary breakfast, but that would be about it. They probably won't even generally have room service when it comes to that. There's select service, and the select service is focusing really on providing an overnight stay at a very basic level. These can also be at various sizes. And then hostels. Well, hostels are certainly the most limited of all the types of different accommodations that are out there. Many offer common sleeping rooms or even dormitory like rooms, public restroom facilities, and so forth. They're often very popular with young travelers, particularly in Europe and places like that. Um, but it just depends on where you're at if you want to do that and if you think that's a good choice for you. In some areas, you can rent private sleeping space by a block of hours at airports and other transportation hubs. You can do this in Japan and so forth and other places where it is just you can buy 4 to 6 hours or something like that. And so these are just different options, and particularly the hostel, though, is on a very basic level and it's open to literally all of the traveling public. Now, when we look more specifically at the lodging sector, and we're talking about hotels, um, the options, the different ways we could phrase it, the different operations based on producing different environments and so forth are just an incredible amount here. As you can see, private clubs, casinos, cruise ships, even timeshare condominiums, campground lodges, all suites, extended stays, and then B&Bs, which are bed and breakfasts and so forth like that. All of those things are just different types of properties offering sleeping accommodations, offering different levels of amenities and so forth. And you would certainly get information on each before you would particularly try any of these sorts of things. So what are some of the average things that we're talking about in general about a lodging property? Well, the average hotel or lodging property, we would say, is about just under 100 rooms. We're at 93 rooms, and they go for about $85 a night. Um, but that's when we average everything in and so forth. When we look at pure numbers only, we find that the average property has many fewer than 93 rooms, uh, and mainly because of lots of small operations in rural areas and places like that. Um, so some common terms that we use as well to divide up the way we would refer to different hotel properties. They're upscale. And this is really when we're looking at them toward with the price classification versus some of the other broader categories I talked about previously. So upscale, mid-price, economy, budget, and so forth. Uh, Now, what is interesting is that there is no standard price that is associated with each of these categories. Upscale is upscale, and it's not tied to a particular price because prices vary around the country, around the environment that that particular property is in, and so forth. And it all reflects also factors of supply and demand, of course. So the amount charged uh, depends on the cost of living. also, especially, we always have to factor in the economic perspective when we talk about the hotel industry and working in it and managing in it. So the amount charged is going to depend on the cost of living in that specific location, and so forth. And so upscale is going to be quite a bit different in San Francisco Bay Area than it is going to be in, say, Atlanta, Georgia, which is also a pretty large city. But it's going to vary considerably because of the cost of living and the availability of housing and so many other factors. Um, and then we have the mid-price, the economy, and the budget. A good example of a mid-range in New York City, for example, as the textbook says, is about 5 times or more as much as the same classification in, say, Columbia, Missouri. And so really the labels are very broad in general, and you have to think regionally or locally when you apply them and try and understand the pricing. Now, when it comes to guests, and this is how customers are referred to in the lodging industry. They are not customers, they are guests. Um, and a guest is defined as a person who rents rooms and or purchases food or beverages at a lodging property. And that's as simple as that. And so anybody who is on the road traveling from one place to another certainly could become a lodging guest or could be considered a tourist in that sense. When we break it down into business and leisure travel, uh, 41% of the typical lodging guests are business travelers, and 59% of the typical lodging guests are leisure travelers. So we do see that it's slightly higher that we have people out there who are just looking to do something fun, and that's the biggest boost for tourism. Um, but the thing to remember here is that professional hoteliers do not use that term customer. They are certainly referring to their guests. And this really establishes what the hotel industry is all about and what the management philosophy guiding that is all about. It is the guest service philosophy that makes operations successful. Um, and so we know that we have to please people, but we also have to be savvy enough to understand that people often combine their business with personal travel or vacations and so forth. And so that does put an additional sort of opportunity, so to speak, in front of a hotelier. But at the same time, it presents challenges and maybe having to deal with expectations. But because of this idea that people do both at the same time, pleasure and leisure, or excuse me, business travel, that means they may want to attend some meetings and then do tourist activities the rest of the time. And they may even stay longer than their business requires them to after the event to do some vacationing, possibly with their families as well. So understanding guests is one of the very most paramount things in the hotel industry. So here's the main characteristics that all people, and we're talking about guests, judge the lodging industry on how well they do. If they were to get a report card, this is how it would be marked in these areas. And so there is always the emphasis on safety, cleanliness, and service. And this is a really, when it comes to guests, uh, we all do this. It's an ongoing and a very thorough mental evaluation that all consumers do. Uh, Service has many aspects, for instance, friendliness, responsiveness, quality, pricing, and so forth. And so guests are constantly, like any consumer, evaluating, comparing to past experiences, and so forth. And particularly, they're looking at, do they feel safe? Is the place clean? And what kind of reception am I getting? What kind of service do I expect and have I received so far? And certainly the greeting is part of that service. Um, and then one thing that we really want to understand about a guest um, is that guests consider the intangible aspects of the purchase decision. Therefore, there is an inseparability in the lodging industry of manufacture and sales. So, what do I mean by that? It's inseparable, uh, but in the sense that a room exists and it is sold at the same time, at the same site. So you have a room which is inventory, and you sell your inventory, uh, but you retain it the next day when the contract ends. So it exists and is sold at the same time in the same place. Um, this also speaks to the issue, the characteristic really in the hotel industry of perishability. If a guest room is not rented on any specific date, then that revenue is lost forever because that room represents daily revenue. And if it is not rented, it's perished. So it is forever lost. That opportunity to make that revenue is forever lost to you. So the perishability in this industry is much higher than you would have, say, in many retail operations. Um, as far as revenue goes, that's really to easily define it as money the hotel collects from guests for the rental of rooms, as well as the purchase of those hotel goods and services that you hope that they will get during their stay. But the perishability is something that you're faced with, and you can measure it. You can look and the very next day say, we only rented such a percentage of our rooms. We had such and such an occupancy rate, and so forth. And so there are many ways to measure how you're doing in the hotel industry, and perishability of rooms is one driving factor that you would like to have as low a number as possible. Now, when it comes to repetitiveness, in the lodging industry, there is a certain amount of operating procedures that are fairly routine. And many of these operating procedures regarding the rooms themselves, they're labor intensive, and that takes up much of the hotel's daily work. In other words, employees of the hotel are providing services to the rooms and so forth. They are cleaning, they are restocking supplies, they are indeed making the room ready to be rented out or sold again in the parlance of the hotel industry. So its perishability is always there every single day. Now, trying to figure out who can own any given hotel at any time can be complicated because there are so many variations on who's the owner and how things are done. Now, a brand is the name of a hotel chain, and sometimes the hotel industry itself will use that as the flag. So when they talk about, they will not mention the brand name; they will say our flag. A franchisor is the company who owns the right to manage a brand and who sells the use of the brand's name or the business model. So the franchisor owns the company, and they are the ones who allow the licensing of various franchises out there to someone who is known as the franchisee. That could be a person, but it could also be an entity such as a management company, or it could be another hotel chain, or it could be many different arrangements, could be the franchisee. So already you can see a variety of different owners that could exist just of these three terms that we have here. But the franchisee is that final person or entity that purchases that right through contract to use the brand name in the business model and so forth. And there'll be a time period to it and so forth, and the price will be agreed upon. So it is a contractual thing, like a franchise operation in any other industry. They'll have its own set of sort of rules that govern the contracts and what's in them, but it will be a contractual arrangement, and the franchisee will have certain rights, and the franchisor will certainly have certain rights and obtain certain profits and revenue streams from selling these franchises. Now, there are all kinds of different ways that property can be owned, like I've been talking about. Uh, there are just many different and complex ownership management arrangements possible today in the industry, as you can see here. As you can see here, the hotel could either be franchise or non-franchise. So that's the affiliation. Is it something that is out there and you see all over the landscape, and it's owned by different independent operators? They are the franchisees. Or is it something that all of the various operations are owned by the company itself? It could be a private company, it could be a publicly held stock company who just doesn't happen to offer franchises to the public in that sense. So the ownership could be completely independent, or it could be the franchise company itself owns it if they choose to give out those franchises and so forth. The operation of it also could be different. The owners quite often don't always operate all the hotels. It could be an independent company that's actually providing the management and so forth, the general manager, and the general manager would be the person who hires all the other managers of the various departments and so forth. So the operation could be an independent company, or it could be the parent company, that franchise company, the franchisor, if they choose to offer them, or it could be a management company that is all that they do is acquire properties to manage, and that's what they're in the business of doing. And they would also be responsible for supplying, obviously, the management, the general manager, and for hiring and running all the operations. So you can see the way to organize and the way the ownership runs can be quite complex and a variety of different arrangements depending. So it is a wide open industry in that sense. As we see here, how about the physical facilities themselves? Let's talk about that just a little bit. Um, as you can see here, a single unit property, not associated with any type of particular national brand. This would be maybe a sole proprietorship, a partnership. Uh, it just exists in one place only. So it's a single unit property and it's a brand unto itself. Or it's a single unit property that are affiliated with a brand and they have become in some way, they've signed a contract with them, become a franchise operation, meeting the standards of the other property and so forth. And it would have a such and such a property in their sign and so forth. Then we start to get into all the various combinations of multi-unit properties. Multi-unit properties that are all part of the same brand, or you could have ownership where they own many properties, but they're not all from the same brand. They're from different hotel companies. So this might be a management company right here that we're talking about. But these could also over here be managed by a company, a management company. Here we have multi-unit properties that are operated by the brand themselves or by others. And then the multi-unit properties that are the brand itself owns and it operates. So it's very interesting. We could have so many different combinations. Generally, though, I think most of us as guests traveling, part of the traveling public, we generally think more in terms of small, large, full service, those sorts of things when we talk about hotels in general. And so it is really when we talk about small hotels. Here's some of the most common organizational structures that we're going to find when it comes to who runs the company, who gets the work of the company done, of the hotel and so forth. Well, certainly in a small hotel, we may not have the title general manager like we would probably have from mid-size on up in all hotel types. But in small hotels, we probably just have a manager. Depending on how small, that's all we need. And the manager will really, they'll be the one who'll hire the executive housekeeper and the staff. So this will be like one department. That manager of the hotel will quite often have a front office manager and a certain amount of staff to help them, just like the executive housekeeper is the like first line manager and has staff, operational employees working for them. Same thing here, first line manager, operational employees. And then of course, hotels of all sizes have to have maintenance, even if it's a one person department in a very small operation, a maintenance head, and then usually some staff. And then generally reporting to the manager, we're going to have a bookkeeper or an accountant. You're going to probably not outsource this sort of operation as much as you would in many other industries and sectors. And there's a real reason for that. It's because hotels are constantly trying to measure their economic effectiveness in various ways. And you need to be able to look at how many rooms were sold yesterday, what was our occupancy rate, what is our RevPAR, what is our revenue per available room at right now, how are we doing? and you may have different levels of rooms selling for different prices. And so traditionally the hotel industry has measured itself in various standard ways, and revenue per available room happens to be one of the mainstays that we really do see out there. So when we're talking about a small hotel like this, um, the number of rooms, as they increase, the number of employee increases, as well as the tasks that need to be done become a little bit more specialized. That makes sense. That happens in all businesses. As you grow in size, you add more jobs. Often the jobs become more specialized or require certain skills. So the number of employees needed and so forth does grow. But what we can say is that the general terms, a small hotel, likely around 75 rooms, it will have limited service and so forth. The property owner, when it comes to the ownership thing again, it might be that manager right there. This might be called a general manager, depending if they had 75 rooms. If they were 20 or 30, they might just be called the manager. It just depends, but they might also be the owner. And then they may have their own front office manager, maybe someone for the night shift, something like that, uh, and these other personnel that you would need to do the very basics of any hotel operation. Now, large hotels, we have large hotels and we have mega hotels. First of all, the large hotels is 350 rooms. They're considered full room hotels. With that increased size, we have department heads that are hired by the general manager. General managers exist in all large hotels. So there are levels of management. You would say that this is likely a middle manager type of title, but depending on the size of the hotel, it could also be a VP level. Certainly, they have that entire role, though. The general manager in a larger hotel really is running the place. And so they have all these other first line managers reporting to them. Just to put it in perspective of regular management hierarchy, food and beverage directors, a first line manager reporting to would naturally be at least a middle manager here, um, the general manager, the human resource manager, and so forth. We have different sorts of departments and so forth. Let me think what the DOSM is. It'll come back to me, I'm sure. Um, um, Front office manager, executive housekeeper, the chief engineer possibly, and that is somebody that you need. It goes beyond just maintenance. Once you start to have 350 plus rooms, you're really talking about going well beyond maintenance, but having an engineer on site to run your HVAC systems and all of that kind of thing. And then, of course, you're going to have an assistant manager to help you because this is quite a large job. Now, we also see large hotels include mega hotels. So that means 3,000 room hotels. So we're talking Las Vegas style hotels here, resort destination sites and things like that. Um, in a mega hotel, we will have a resident manager who assists that general manager with the direct supervision and coordination of several of the operating departments. It simply becomes too big a task for one person. And so that is a very important person is the resident manager, or depending on, they may call it the assistant manager to the GM. It's whatever the title might be at that particular place. Um, the food and beverage department may contain in its own self several highly specialized positions that might warrant first level managerial status and so forth. So things can get quite complicated in the hierarchy and so forth that it takes to provide full service to guests, particularly in these large hotels. Now, line departments uh, really are a reflection of two types of departments in the hotel industry in general. You have line departments and staff departments. Now, line departments are hotel divisions, and they are in the chain of command that directly bring in some revenue. And that's what they're responsible for, creating revenue streams for the property operations. So revenues come from the front office as they collect room rent for the night, and then revenues come in from food and beverage, uh, and so forth. So examples of line departments, you can see them right here, would be the F&B of various types as well. So that might be a dining room or a snack bar or a breakfast buffet, or it could be many different things. But line departments generally are definitely considered revenue department. Uh, in the case of the housekeeping and maintenance, though, these are an expense department, um, and so they directly affect the operations and the profitability of these other line departments that are bringing in the revenue streams. Um, we also have staff departments, and these are more of a supportive role, although we would have to say that the maintenance department and so forth is a supportive role to the food and beverage and so forth. Um, the staff departments are really divisions that provide some technical, other supportive assistance needed to support those revenue producing line departments that I've talked about. So examples are like you see here, purchasing, human resources, accounting. They are overhead. They do cost money, but without them, it makes understanding your operations and doing a good job uh, very difficult. And so obviously, employees in these departments perform functional duties related to the name of these departments and so forth. And these, of course, these three here would all be considered traditional functional departments in that organizing sense. Now, revenue centers, of course, are those places, those departments in the hotel operation where you generate a revenue stream. And so that certainly is the front office, um, and it's also the food and beverage department. But there are many other things here, uh, as you can see from the list at the bottom here, that can bring in money for you. Dining rooms, lounges, room service, banquet areas. And then as you see here, maybe you're providing some special telephone service, some Wi-Fi, something like that, maybe some space rental, uh, parking garage fees, vending machines, certainly, uh, and then even different things like a golf course, but you could also have a gym or a spa, things like that. So revenue centers depend on the level of traffic, of course, and, whether or not you're a limited service, full service hotel, all of those things factor in. But as you increase in size, remember, you increase in the level of employees that you need to make all of this work. On the other hand, we have cost centers. These are departments that incur costs supporting those revenue centers. And so these are the expense sides of, of the various departments that you'll have in the hotel industry. Um, and so the marketing department supports you. It produces promotional uh, literature for you and campaigns and all the things you need from that sort of aspect. But you also have things like the ongoing maintenance or engineering requirements, accounting, the human resource, and of course, the Department of Security and so forth. Um, so you can see that it costs money to make money. Operations are not free. And these are the areas where it's just very logical to assume which one would be a cost center, which department might be a revenue center, and so forth. Um, and there are certainly challenges out there in the hotel industry. In particular, there's a huge labor shortage. Notwithstanding the pandemic right now, in normal times, there has been up until just this past year of the pandemic, um, a real shortage of good qualified workers in the industry in general. And so one of the things that a lot of general managers have focused on is trying to and create a more engaging atmosphere to reduce turnover, to increase retention, of course, ways to raise morale and so forth, to increase productivity, and to indeed cast a wider net and recruit from different markets than they have been, maybe increasing the diversity of their workforce and so forth. Um, there are some legal aspects and so forth to this, but really we talk about cost containment. It's just how do we stay efficient, keep costs down, but in ways that do not impact on quality. because remember that guest is always evaluating and comparing us to previous experiences and other brands and so forth. And so we definitely need to be efficient, but again, being effective in the hotel industry, meeting our mission, in other words, is satisfying the guest and having them have a really quality experience. So we can do that. Leaders in all industries who can become the most efficient and not have an impact quality, particularly when they're delivering a service, are the ones who are going to dominate the marketplace. And so you really have to be careful. If you cut service or product quality, that you're not hurting your overall revenue stream, because the guest perspective of your brand will travel into the future and by word of mouth. So cost containment, certainly you keep costs down and you be smart about things, but it's got to be all about the customer. So there are some operating challenges as well here. Competition is very heavy in the hotel industry. And it's been a complaint for some decades now that in many prime geographic areas where there are attractions that draw a lot of visitors, that existing hoteliers are complaining that there are already too many existing hotels for the amount and number of guests that want to rent them and so forth. So with increased competition means less revenue, and then generally a higher expense as you have increased marketing costs and so forth. And then you do have problems when you can't pay as much as you would like because revenues are down due to this increased competition. Yet at the same time, you're strapped to provide the best quality and service experience that you can in order to retain that business when you do get it. So it's a complicated package, particularly in the hotel industry, dealing with the level of competition all the time. Um, there are just simply not enough guests to rent to. When it comes to this legal side, you really do need to know the local and regional laws and comply with them. Sometimes they can be a little complex. That would be one of the tasks that you would set your bookkeeper or accountant to keeping you informed of, or your HR specialist, depending on what field it touches on the most. Um, but those are two employees. When you get to the level of a large or mega hotel, you will certainly have those sorts of personnel at your disposal. And those are the ones that have to keep on top of that. And you certainly should know about that. Um, so you're going to need some other specialists who can help you along the way, and you'll want to hire people in your managerial structure who can provide information and advice to you as a general manager in particular. So you want specialists who have knowledge about hospitality industry in general, but also about the local community business associations, who are the better attorneys and have the best reputation in the areas. Um, where can I find the best human resource specialists and so forth if I have to outsource payroll or something more mundane, something like that. And then certainly there are marketing and sales challenges all the time in any industry that is highly competitive. In this case, what we find is an increased market segmentation in the hotel industry. We have part of that competition that is so intense is that there are many players out there seeking to find a particular niche or small little segment that without too much competition, they can still find profitable enough for operations to do that. And so what are their efforts focus on? Well, like it says here, a very highly defined, smaller group of travelers, but a target segment nonetheless that they can identify some common characteristics of needs and wants that they can serve. And so we find that this segments the market further and further into many, many smaller operations down to the micro level. And then as we see from how complicated the ownership uh, can be of these different brands and the management of it, that all this overlap, it becomes very difficult from the average consumer out there when they're trying to determine which one to sign on with, which one have the best quality and best service, which one can they really trust. Um, it's very hard to differentiate because they all seem to be the same. They're all using the same big names, and reputations are hard to dispute, and so forth. So there is this sort of desensitization and selective perception kicking in on the part of consumers in general. Now, we also have to mention that part of this is that guests are becoming much more sophisticated. I mean, consumers in general are becoming more sophisticated. Uh, Consumers have a great amount of power at their disposal when it comes to spending their money. And so the threat of substitute goods, as we look at it through one of Porter's perspectives, is that they can always find something else to spend their money on. And guests are sophisticated. They know how to use the internet to get the best prices, but also the best quality service, and they're reading reviews. They're not ignoring reviews. Uh, and so they're very savvy. And with the increased sophistication of guests comes an increased challenge for marketing professionals. So everything is more competitive. It raises it to an even higher level. Online booking, for instance, is great for the consumer, the average guest, but it's terrible for the average hotel because it adds another layer of expense that the hotel has to pay to use that big database. And so there's always marketing and sales challenges that are out there. There are demands because of this increased sophistication and differences among guests that they want different things available to them. In other words, they want amenities. And they may not always be as aware of the level of your hotel and the number of rooms and the service level you're providing. They may just assume certain things. In other words, maybe you do have a certain number of guests who do want the use of a business center of some type, a room perhaps where they could come in, use some computer terminals, connect to the internet, have a printer, and so forth, and pay small costs and so forth. Well, if it's not a substantial enough segment of your business travelers who want that service, then you may actually be losing money on providing the extra room for it, the maintenance of it, the upkeep, and the supervision of it, and all of that stuff. So in that sense, it may increase your costs, but not raise your revenue that much to make it worth it for you. In other words, it is only appealing to a small segment of your hotel market. So these sorts of questions require that the hotel general manager be particularly savvy, that they have experience, and that they have intuition gained through some time in the industry. And that is one thing about the industry. There are many opportunities out there for careers and development and be able to get into the business and learn these sorts of things through experience. So guests are constantly demanding higher quality, and they want value, just like anybody, any consumer wants anytime they spend money. Certainly, the technology challenge is a big one for a hotel. Interactive reservation service systems and so forth. The ability to look at a database and be able to dig down and find out the history and so forth and all the previous uses by a particular guest of your services and things like that. Maybe they stayed at different parts of the hotel chain in different places and so forth. Managing your room rate and so forth. Um, when it comes to these reservation systems in particular, we find that there's a huge rise in online travel websites. And then we find that consumers are now using their smart mobile devices to become their own travel agents on the fly. Uh, when they're using this data mining technology, they're using cloud technology, and consumers themselves are actually getting succeeding levels of detail, data mining, in fact, mining down to find out the best rates and so forth. They're trying to do this to look at data and saying, should I stay at this hotel or this other hotel, to make purchasing decisions. So the average consumer out there is using technology, and so that also in it of itself becomes a challenge for a hotel to be able to respond in kind. And like I was mentioning, it can be used to do the room rate management. You can adjust your rates. You can use other places like social media and so forth, technology, to kind of gauge your demand, to give you another place where you can interact and get your message and your brand out there to the public and so forth. So these things do intersect. And then, of course, the cloud computing. You'll want to be able to have access to some storage capability of some type, instead of just using old style computer hard drive. Certainly hotels are smart enough in the organizational sense that they have some sort of cloud arrangement set up, and so forth. It is interesting that when we look at the different economic challenges that are out there, uh, there is no doubt that hoteliers are affected by things uh, in the global sphere, just like any business, but in particular, this industry, the tourist industry, has been extremely hard hit by the pandemic. And there is this old saying, as goes the economy, so goes the lodging industry. Well, the lodging industry has lost hundreds of thousands of jobs. Um, Women in particular have been hard hit. If you research some recent articles and so forth of the pandemic, its effect on the hotel industry, you'll find that it's been very hard on women's jobs, on hotel occupancy rates are just collapsed, although things look much better for the future now that vaccines have arrived and so forth. Um, Hoteliers know these things. They have learned these things in particular in the past year, uh, and they have learned to anticipate that the economy on the other side of the world can have an effect on my operations here, certainly. Um, and there's just something, only so much any business can do, particularly segments that are dependent on public travel, whether it is for leisure or business or both. And so hoteliers in particular are always looking at how are general things going in the macro level of economics, worldwide, and particularly on the micro level in their region and so forth, depending on what's happening. Um, and like I mentioned earlier, there are many opportunities to get into this industry. You can, for instance, get an internship, um, and those are available if you seek them out. I did have a student who took 11 credit internship in Colorado at a resort hotel. He liked it so much that he took several other courses. He ended up going to Switzerland, taking a professional hoteliers course there, just graduated from that, and now he's got a job in, I think, Savannah, uh, South Carolina, somewhere like that, at a resort hotel. Very interesting. All from attending one class, an online course I gave in the about management and tourism. Um, there's all kinds of ways to get into it. If you have a BA in business administration or a concentration in marketing or anything like that, maybe no concentration, you can go get a front assistant manager's job, front desk manager, and learn some experiences and learn the ropes. Um, so there are many different ways available to you to get into the industry. And it is very appealing to some and not so appealing to others because it can be both fast paced, depending on the level of the hotel, could also be incredibly slow paced. Um, but there is a credible amount of variety and so forth to choose from. And so there's a little bit to research here if you were interested. Uh, how would you start your career? Well, like I've been saying, we are starting to see more and more courses in this material in particular related to hospitality. I hope to come out with another course at some point just about the tourism industry in general. But really, go get a job. If you don't need a particularly high level job, um, there are a variety of positions open and various hotels, and all you have to do is check into it. And and then get out there and just start meeting people and network and so forth, and you should be just fine. Um, just like any industry, this one does have a lot of potential, and there is potential to move up into ownership as well in many aspects of it. Okay, folks, that's all I wanted to talk about this time. I'll talk to you again.